Good. So I'll start just very briefly by introducing myself and the Insiders Outside project under whose aegis this event is happening tonight. I'm the founding director of what started out as a small and relatively unambitious project called indeed Insiders Outsiders and subtitled Refugees from Nazi Europe and Their Contribution to British Culture. It took the form of a year-long nationwide in-person festival just before COVID, which straddled all the arts, even though I am an art historian myself and the realm of music is definitely not my comfort zone. But it was a wonderfully fruitful project, and it had an unexpected afterlife when COVID struck. We went online, and this event tonight, which I will be handing over to my colleague and friend Daniel very shortly, is part of the ongoing series of online events on themes, topics broadly related to that overarching, wonderfully rich, rewarding topic. Right, I'm just going to, sorry, just give me a minute to admit a few latecomers. So as I say, music is not my comfort zone by any means, and it's my great pleasure to hand over to Daniel Snowman. Many of you will already have come across him, the eminent cultural historian, but he's eminently well qualified to be presiding over this evening's event to celebrate the launch of a book that is imminent. We don't yet have an exact date. Eric, maybe you can indeed tell us when that's going to be, but it's certainly looming, a new publication entitled The Glyndebourne Émigrés, Operatic Mobilities in Southern England, 1934 to 1940, jointly published by Clemson University Press in the States, in association with Liverpool University Press. I will perhaps just briefly outline the plan of action for this evening. As I say, I'm going to hand over very shortly to Daniel, who will provide a short slide, sort of an image accompanied contextual introduction to the subject of Glyndebourne. And he will then hand over to Norbert Mein, who will talk primarily about his wonderful project under which the whole Glyndebourne research really kind of took off, called Music, Migration and Mobility. And then we'll be hearing a few brief words from Phil Boot, who's the Glyndebourne archivist, who's just joined us, and also from Alison Merrow of Liverpool University Press and Eric Saylor of Clemson University Press. So quite a large roster of people here. And then perhaps at really the core of the event will be Nils Grosch, who is one of the co-editors together with Beth Snyder of the new book, will be in conversation with Daniel about the overarching themes and the sort of the content of the book in question. Lovely. So Daniel, let me just briefly say, I say you're eminently well qualified. You certainly are. You are have been the author of a seminal book, I think everybody would acknowledge that, called The Hitler Émigrés, the cultural impact on Britain of refugees from Nazism, first published 2003, am I right, and republished in 2012. He also contributed an excellent introductory essay to the anthology that accompanied the Insiders Outsiders project called Insiders Outsiders, Refugees from Nazi Europe and Their Contribution to British Visual Culture primarily. And also, completely pertinently, he's the author, as of 2010, of a book called The Gilded Stage, A Social History of Opera. So with very great pleasure, Daniel, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Monica, very much. I want to start by putting up an image of Glyndebourne as it is now. And if I'm able to do that, and if I can't, why can't I? Why did everything go wrong at the very, very beginning?
We have tried it. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yes. I need to get back to my main screen, I think, in order to find the Glyndebourne images that I want to show everybody, i.e. these. And then I want to do slideshow, and I want to show play from the start.
I can't see anything, Daniel. I don't think anybody can yet.
No, then let me go without pictures. It's probably better if I do.
No. Just click on screen share. The PowerPoint has to be open. I'm sure you obviously know this, but it has to be open on your desktop.
Yes, I know. I thought it was, but it isn't.
Shall I can probably screen share. Shall I do that from my end, and then you can tell me
if you can do. Yes.
Let me try doing that.
Basically, what I want to say is welcome to Glyndebourne, but not to Glyndebourne itself, the opera house in the heart of Sussex and the beautiful, elegant grounds in which it's placed that many of you will know, but back to its earlier history.
Can I just check? Sorry, Daniel, is everybody able to see the pictures now?
Probably
Yes.
not.
Norbert, can you just confirm? Norbert? Or Niels?
I could just see it, and now
all
it's gone
good?
again.
Yes? All good now? Okay,
Yeah.
Daniel, do continue. Yeah, all good. But just tell me when to move on, yeah?
You can see that picture?
Yeah, this is the first picture. The first.
Is the picture visible to people
Yes.
watching?
Yes,
this
Daniel,
talk?
it is.
Yes.
In that case, I will simply move on. You don't have to see me. You have to see these pictures because I'm gradually moving backwards in time so as not to deal with the Glyndebourne of today, the beautiful house in the Sussex Downs with lovely opera and so on. But I want to go back to its early history because that's what this new book is going to be all about. And these are a few old black and white images. And the building was not built as an opera house. It was built, as we'll find out, as a home for a man, a wealthy man, John Christie, who loved opera. He was very concerned with matters German. He loved Wagner. Here is the new book. And our guest this evening is going to be Nils Grosch, Professor of Musicology at the University of Salzburg. And as you'll see, Nils and his colleague Beth Snyder have recently put together a fascinating book with contributions from a wide range of scholars focusing on the origins of Glyndebourne. Just look at that title, tells you so much. The Glyndebourne Émigrés, Operatic Mobilities in Southern England, 1934 to 1940, precisely at the time of the early build-up and development of the Nazi Party in Central Europe, the Third Reich, Austria, etc. So I'm going to take you back to the origins of Glyndebourne and to John Christie, who, as I say, he was a great Teutonophile, great German lover of matters German, loved to go on down the Rhine on wonderful tours, sometimes wearing Germanic lederhosen, seeking out the Wagnerian Rhine maidens as he went. And he had these various concerts he'd put on in the organ room of his great historic house, Glyndebourne, near Lewes, that he'd inherited. And the concerts very often included a young singer whom he was attracted to, recently married, the Canadian soprano Audrey Mildmay. He and Audrey married. He took her on their honeymoon to Salzburg and Bayreuth festivals. Glyndebourne gradually, as we'll see, got talked about almost as the British Salzburg for reasons we might come on to in a moment. And the concerts moved on from the organ room into an adjacent room that got built up into a sort of sensible, not terribly large mini theatre. There he is with Audrey Mildmay. So it wasn't established as a sort of all English, oldie Englandy, Sussex Downs, lovely estate, grand house for English people to come to. It was increasingly built up by Christie with the encouragement of Audrey Mildmay. She famously said to her husband, you know, John, if you're going to do it properly. And he said, well, what is properly? He couldn't manage an opera company. He had money and he loved matters Central European, Germanic, operatic, without really taking much account of what was going on in the German world at the time. But it opened as a festival in May 1934. Think of the date, not that long after the establishment of the Nazi Party, and therefore the cultural impact, the insistence on who could perform, who couldn't, what to do, get rid of Jews and all the rest of it. And yet there was Audrey Mildmay in the middle there, playing the part of Susanna in the opening Glyndebourne Festival production of Figaro in May 1934. But note that very opening production, it was conducted by the brilliant German émigré Fritz Busch, Busch, of course. There he is. And the director was a German actor, stage director, Karl Ebert, formerly a pupil of the great Max Reinhardt. So these two Central European multi-talented artistic creators, the musician and the stage director, came together in Glyndebourne and put on an early opera, which it was a kind of what the Wagnerian era would have called a Gesamtkunstwerk, a sort of pulling together in a single work of all the arts. Remember that opera, I never quite know how to define it, but it's the most spectacular production form that tries to combine all the art forms going back to ancient Greece in a way. Music, drama, sets, costumes, chorus, lighting, scenery, and so on. So here were the original conductor and the original director, Karl Ebert. Lovely picture from the new book that I'm going to be talking about, of Ebert a little bit later, directing not one of the many early opera by Mozart that they tended to put on there, but you'll be surprised to know Verdi's Macbeth. And here he was a few years later. Look at the character he is with the witches whom he's directing. Drama, costumes, music, character, lighting, scenery, props, everything had to be integrated in the way that people like Busch and Ebert and others wanted to produce opera for Glyndebourne, something I'm sure that John Christie appreciated and was prepared to help finance, but it was way beyond his kind of understanding of the nature of what it was that he was by then trying to host in his house in Glyndebourne. I should add, by the way, Fritz Busch, the conductor, was brother of Adolf Busch, founder of the celebrated Busch quartet, while Ebert had until recently been in charge of one of the top opera houses in Berlin. These were top people from the German world. Neither of them, by the way, happened to be Jewish, Busch nor Ebert, but both could simply not abide the brutal restrictions the Nazi regime was increasingly imposing upon the arts in Germany. Before long, they were joined by the Vienna-born Rudolph Bing. They're the three of them in the gardens there in Glyndebourne. Rudolph Bing, on the left, went on to help set up the Edinburgh Festival during a Glyndebourne visit in the early years of the war, something I might mention later on. And of course, most famously ran the New York Metropolitan Opera for many years. And I remember meeting him there in the 1980s. From the outset, Glyndebourne called upon the talents of many refugees from what was now the Nazi Third Reich. And it was these, not just this threesome you see here, but the German Jewish conductor, Hans Oppenheim, the Hungarian-born Jani Strasser, Caspar Neher, a left-wing stage designer who long had worked with Bertolt Brecht. They all came in their different ways and helped produce the Gesamtkunstwerk, the broadly produced, brilliant opera productions that were put on at Glyndebourne. The new book that we're going to be noting today, as Monica has said, is the Glyndebourne Émigrés. What a title, Operatic Mobilities in Southern England, 1934 to 40, by Nils Grosch, whom we're going to meet in just a few moments, and Beth Snyder, who I think is watching. I'm going to put the pictures off for a while if I can. If I can, maybe I can.
No, Daniel, I'm in charge of the pictures now. I've just done so.
What
Daniel,
are we doing?
all done. All done.
Oh, brilliant. Wonderful. All right. There's me. Quite important about this book, before we get Niels, who's there to talk about it, I want to call upon Norbert, who's here down below somewhere. There he is, Norbert Mine, somebody I've known for many years, worked brilliantly at the Royal College of Music. The new book has an intro by Stephen Langridge, son of the famous tenor Philip Langridge, but it's got a wonderful intro from Norbert. And I want, Norbert, just for you to tell us briefly both about your wonderful project at the RCM, Music, Migration and Mobility, very much the same kind of topic. So tell us about the RCM project and about your introduction to the new Glyndebourne book that I'll shortly be talking to Nils Grosch about. So over to you, Norbert.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Can everyone hear me?
All good.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for this, for demonstrating yet again your deeply felt enthusiasm for this period and for this history, Daniel. And I will be very brief. I'm Norbert Mein. I'm born in Germany, but I've been in this country for coming up to 30 years. And I was, as a professor at the Royal College of Music, in the position to apply for a large research grant to explore this history. And we have been doing this at the college. We've been involved with this theme for since about 2012, I think. And so this grew gradually, and having this enormous grant from the Arts and Humanities Research Council gave us the luxury of building an international team, and of working interdisciplinarily with historical musicology, with practical musicians, who were a very important part of this project. And I kind of probably count myself more in that camp than among the historians, but I'm also now, I've learned so much through this project, actually, and also, of course, with geographers and mobility studies, and I'm sure Niels will talk a bit about this. Now, the history of these émigrés is vast. I mean, there were about an estimated 400 professional musicians among the émigrés who managed to come to Britain to find refuge here during the war. And many of them, of course, stayed and contributed very, very significantly. And within our project, we looked at many individual biographies, and we created story maps of these people's journeys and lives and networks. But we also undertook 3 historical case studies, and by far the largest of that was Glyndebourne. The other 2 were the Anglo-Austrian Music Society, which Beth also wrote about, and then the third one was Dartington, which of course also had a really important input from émigrés. And we also were able to produce sheet music editions. We put on many concerts as far as the pandemic allowed, because it, of course, all happened during the pandemic. And we created recordings, and we built an online resource that is still now available on the website of the Royal College of Music. It's basically under the title of the project, Music, Migration and Mobility. You can find this very substantial online resource, which includes oral history interviews with many first-hand and also witnesses, first-hand émigrés, and also witnesses on friends and colleagues of those people, and then story maps and repertoire guides, recordings. So please explore that. But the Glyndebourne work certainly was actually one of the first things we did when the project started. And we were able to use this wonderful archive that Glyndebourne has. And I think rather than me talking about this, I thought you should meet, and thank you for coming, Phil, you should meet the archivist, Phil Boot, who will now just say a few words about the archive that gave us all this material on which the book is based.
Hi, everybody. My name is Phil Boot, and greetings from a very sunny, very warm Glyndebourne today. I'm at Glyndebourne right now. I had the privilege to work with some of the people who were involved in this production whilst they were undertaking research in the Glyndebourne archive. But this project actually predates me. It was well underway when I arrived in 2019. So it was actually quite a nice introduction for me as a new archivist to Glyndebourne, and was a nice way to start to understand the history. So for context, the Glyndebourne archive is extensive. We hold over 10,000 items of correspondence from the period that this project is focused on alone. Reviews and press clippings for every opera event and news item from 1933 onwards. Photography for every production we've ever staged from 1934 all the way through to today. Over 600 costume designs with a large amount from the pre-war period. Printed material, which includes everything from programs, maps, menus, leaflets, posters, the list goes on. Production notes and files, which is all about how the operas tick in from the creative teams. The research team for this project would have been some of the first people to have accessed all of this material as one capsule, as one story. We have a lot of researchers come to the archive, but no one, as far as I'm aware, has ever done a project this big with us. And to cover all this material across 6 or 7 years, across not only this archive, but other archives around the world, is an incredible achievement for this team. So what's really the legacy for Glyndebourne and the Glyndebourne archive? Well, from this project, firstly, it's wonderful to have the story of Glyndebourne's genesis out there in the world afresh. It's a well-known story for those of us at Glyndebourne and amongst our members about how the festival started, who was involved, and why it started. But as we count down to our centenary in 2034, it's a nice reminder of the rich and valuable history that we have here at Glyndebourne and the wealth of material in the archive. It's also allowed us to think and newly reassess the global impact that Glyndebourne's had during those pre-war days, and the impact that our founders and the first creative teams had on music and opera in the UK and further afield. And for the archive directly, it's opened up new avenues for funding. We're now in the middle of a very exciting project funded by Sidney E. Franks Foundation to catalogue the correspondence of the archive from 1934 to 1954, which will allow much, much wider access to the material that was so pivotal in this project. Therefore, the project and publication has already provided a launchpad for future research and will undoubtedly go on to benefit Glyndebourne researchers, both internally to Glyndebourne and externally for years to come. So really, I won't keep you much longer, but it's really just a huge thank you from Glyndebourne and a huge thank you from the archive to all those involved in this project. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Phil. And I mean, I can really only encourage everyone to go and visit this archive. I mean, visit Glyndebourne, of course, as well. But there is these long holdings. And just to add, you know, what I actually did write about in my introduction, which is to try to give a larger canvas for the then closer investigation of the early days of Glyndebourne, because I tried to summarize all stories of emigrés that worked at Glyndebourne even into the early 21st century. So there was Martin Isep, who was the head of music for many years, who actually worked there until the early 2000s. But many others, like my former Guildhall coach, Paul Hamburger, or Peter Gellhorn. There was Erna Gahl, who was a language coach and répétiteur. But there are many others, so I won't go into all these names now. But I would like to introduce Alison Merot, who is the director of Clemson University Press. And she wanted to say a few words. And after that, Eric Saylor, who is the lead of the series about British musical culture within Clemson University Press, and also professor of music history and musicology at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. So I will pass on to Alison first, and then Eric, if you just take over straight from there. So that's the publishers who are now going to put all this into the world. So thank you for coming today, and Alison, take it away.
Thank you, Norbert. It's nice to see you. We've corresponded quite a bit. Clemson University Press is based in South Carolina. We are a university press who publishes scholarship largely on modernist literature. But since I came here and I am a musicologist, we have started doing more music scholarship. So when Beth and Nils came to me with this project, I was very excited. Eric and I had gotten the series launched recently. Prior to that, it was a natural fit. And as an opera scholar myself, this was very, very exciting to me. The book has borne fruit. It is absolutely every bit as good as I was hoping it would be, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. And sidebar, I met Fritz Busch's grandson in Bloomington, Indiana, when I was in grad school, because he was the master electrician there. So there's a little tidbit that you did not expect to hear today. I'm going to pass it over to Eric.
Thank you, Alison. Again, my name's Eric Saylor. I'm professor of music history at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. So greetings from 6 hours in the past to most of you watching this today. We are absolutely delighted to go ahead and be able to showcase this particular work as part of the Studies in British Musical Culture series. This was a brainchild of the North American British Music Studies Association, which is a scholarly organization here based primarily in the US that was founded in 2004. And I mention this simply because one of the things I find fascinating about a project like this is that we tend to think of Glyndebourne as this sort of quintessentially British or English institution, and yet, of course, as we've seen already, it would not exist were it not for the international efforts that went into making it a reality. This is also very much the case when it comes to scholarship on British music, which those of us involved in NABMSA have had a very strong stake in encouraging over the last 20 years or so. No longer Das Land ohne Musik. The members of NABMSA and so many other groups have worked to go ahead and show British music to be the incredibly cosmopolitan effort that it has been. And while Daniel made his reference to the Gesamtkunstwerk a little bit earlier, one thing I think is wonderful about a project like that from Dr. Grosch and Dr. Snyder is the idea that this is a collaborative project. A Gesamtkunstwerk, the idea behind that is it's a single vision that makes the whole thing possible. Here, though, we get a tremendous amount of insight and revelation through diversity of perspectives. So many people have come together to go ahead and make this a reality, not least the careful guiding hands of Doctors Grosch and Schneider on this. And also, as managing editor, Alison is the one who does all the work. She's the one who managed to make the whole project run smoothly behind the scenes. I merely say, that looks excellent. Let's continue with this. And I must say, today's project does look excellent. So without further ado, Norbert or Monica, I'm very happy to turn it back over to you to introduce the main event today. And thank you so much for letting us be a part of this. We're so delighted to be able to go ahead and give a showcase to Dr. Grosch and the wonderful work he's done on this amazing festival tradition in Britain.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm going to unspotlight, if that's a word, the people who've already had their say and hand over to Daniel to embark on in conversation with Nils Grosch.
Well, I'm very thrilled to have this opportunity. I have to say, I haven't actually received the physical copy of the book yet, which I always like to do, because I really only like reading a book if I've got a pen in my hand and can scribble, yes, but see page 32 or so. But I've read the whole thing carefully through on screen. And what I want to do, and I want to talk to Niels for maybe even half an hour, who knows, the sort of the chief issues that the book raises, how you came about to develop the idea of the book. And first of all, a word or two about yourself. I've mentioned, Niels, that you're professor of musicology, and I think head of musical theatre research at the University of Salzburg. You've written and studied very broadly. I think you wrote when you were much younger about the Neue Sachlichkeit, the new realism or objectivity or whatever they used to call themselves, back in kind of Weimar times in a way. Anyway, nowadays, so much of your research goes into theatre of various kinds, migration, media, theatre, music, and you're the ideal person to co-edit a book of essays about the creation and the early establishment of Glyndebourne, very much, as everybody, including myself, has said, a product not of oldie English idealism and lovely country estates in Sussex, but artistically of a huge range of cultural impact and import from the rapidly developing German world of the mid-1930s. So I want to just start with, in a way, Nils, what led you and your colleagues and Alison, whom we've just to develop the idea of a book on the early history of Glyndebourne? As I tried to say in my little intro, the popular image of Glyndebourne is it's always been a nice, good, historical, oldie English country estate for posh, rich people who like dressing up. But over to you. What led to the book?
Thank you so much, and let me say thank you for giving us this this opportunity to introduce to this book, and thanks to all those who contributed to it. And I've seen that some of the co-authors. I'm not the author of the book; I co-edited, but
Yes.
Some of the authors are here, and so hello to everybody.
And you've written several chapters to it, including the opening one. Talk about in a moment. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, what I think that the starting point was not Glyndebourne. The starting point was the idea of mobility, which is a very important word in the already in the title and in the text as well. And the idea how culture and music and theater develops within mobility, within movements. And that led us to the situation of Glyndebourne, how it was created, how the idea came up. Because when you read books, there are a couple of books about Glyndebourne and stories and so on, and the narrative goes that there was something that was created from more or less this country house, and John Christie, who initiated the whole thing. He seems to be the central figure for many decades of that festival, and it's very much like many histories of cultural institutions. It's a story of blood and land and rootedness, and it was so fascinating when I was sitting in the archive and I found a paper there was in the correspondence of one of two between two of the pivotal figures for Glyndebourne. There was Karl Ebert and Rudolph Bing, who was the general. He later became the general manager of Glyndebourne, of the festival in the 1930s. But there was in a time in 1933 when nobody knew about the word Glyndebourne or that place, when they had the idea, and they were all on the move. They were in Vienna because they were working they used to work in Berlin, and they were thrown out. Bing was Jewish, and Ebert was sympathetic with the Social Democrats, so they were looking for other places, and they invented the idea of establishing an opera production in no space, no idea where. It could be any, and they even had the idea to do it at any countryside, and that happened in Glyndebourne. But the idea was something I called it like I used the metaphor of a rising spaceship, because it reminded me of some, there are some sci-fi movies where you see a building around, or in Men in Black, there's a building around, nobody knows what it is, and at some point in the movie you discover that it's not a building, it's a spaceship. It can rise and it can land somewhere else. And that's what happened to the concept. There was really innovative concept that had been established by some really modernist creatives in mostly Germany, not at Salzburg, not at Bayreuth. There was mostly in Berlin, in the municipal opera house, the Städtische Oper, and at some other places where in Dresden, where Busch used to work, and they just tried to find an opportunity. Now they were all thrown out, and they couldn't go on developing that concept that was so innovative and so modern, and to find a new place. And they had their networks in Buenos Aires and in Turkey and in many other places. But why at such a strange place out of nowhere?
Yeah, I mean, the sheer chance that all these people came to Sussex was not predictable. As you mentioned, Turkey, Buenos Aires, all over the world, many of them. Chris's wife, the soprano, was actually lived a lot of her life in Canada, came to England, of course, and all that. I love the metaphor, the rising spaceship. It's a very good metaphor for something like that happened. I noticed that in the title of the book, the title of Norbert's project, the title of your opening chapter, which you write, the word mobility, which you've used, comes again and again and again. Mobility. And I don't want to sort of distract us, but at the very time we're talking about migration, mobility, it's a huge, scary political concept when people don't talk about who they are, where they're coming from, what they might do if they're let into this country or that, or what they might be forbidden from doing, sometimes for very good reasons. But mobility, you and I are talking a language which is partly a result of Roman occupation of Britain, or partly Nordic, partly German, Gott, divinity, and so on. So mobility and culture are two very integrated subjects over time. I'm not praising mobility or culture, but they're an important part of the history of the world that we're living in, including particularly a place that's benefited from it, like Glyndebourne. I noticed the next chapter got this wonderful title, Where Music Flows Like Money. Where music flows like money. I could ask you in detail, but I won't, all about the finances of Glyndebourne, because after all, it was run by a rich man called Christie, who thought he was doing the right thing, particularly with his pretty wife who sang. But it's a lovely little poem I almost can't not tell you, by Herbert Farjohn, which is quoted in the book. At 5 o'clock in evening dress, we catch the afternoon express, conspicuous among the press and feeling slightly funny. In snowy shirts and showy gowns, we speed through villages and towns until at last we reach the Downs, the Sussex Downs, where music flows like money. Not sure whether it did, but it did up to a point. Anyway, you then follow with a couple of chapters on the all-important internationalization of early pre-war Glyndebourne. Not just those in charge of all aspects. We've mentioned Fritz Busch, Karl Ebert, Rudolph Bing, but the many, many stagehands, designers, solo singers, especially women, which Beth has written about in the book, coming across from Nazi Central Europe, and some of the other famous figures whom Norbert referred to just now. It really was very much more international Just look at the cast lists, the conductors, the designer, who provided the props, who translated from this language into that language. And it's very, very much more international and cosmopolitan, even in those early years, than I think people realize. And you brought that out in the book very importantly, I think. Over to you.
Yes, of course. I mean, there was kind of the recipe to have it really on an international level of production, but also in an international style of production. There was a kind of contradiction to the Italian style of production that dominated most British opera houses as well. That was much more mobile and flexible, and that many singers did not understand. We have in that correspondence, somebody is asked to sing in the next Glyndebourne production and to stay in a couple of weeks or more than a month for rehearsal, and she says, no, I've been singing the Queen of the Night in the Zauberflöte several times. I did that in wherever, in Florence, in Vienna, I don't know. Why should I rehearse that? And the idea to have the production of an opera as a work of art that is developed for this production and this scenery, and it's not the same as in Vienna or in Berlin.
No,
and that was really that was for some of those, especially those who had worked with Ebert or with Busch and also with Oppenheim. They understood, and they were really ready to come for a long time and low salaries. They didn't earn very much in regarding that they had to stay so long at a place where that was not so easy to come to, because many of them were in some of them in Italy. They used to live in Austria and in Scandinavia and in many places all over Europe, and some of them were British as well. But it was really a new concept of production, which in a way for us it's quite normal to have that long periods, and that it's really that long periods of detailed rehearsal, and you have a really distinctive production at this place and at another place. You have to travel or to go somewhere to see that production. You can't see the same thing in the next city opera house. But in that stagione system, that was very normal that the opera stars were traveling with their concept and even their dress of a certain role. The same Papageno, that was the best Papageno in the world, so he had to sing that wherever. And that was really a new concept, and it was not so easy to manage. That was why the manager was so important, who could arrange rehearsals, which means rehearsal salaries, and arrange hotel and travel costs and contracts and so on.
Well, there was a kind of regularity to what Glyndebourne tried to set up. First of all, it was not an occasional show. It was an annual season with the performers expected to stay more or less in residence throughout the rehearsal period, low salaries, but communality to what was created. Whereas if you look back...
that was a by effect of that situation, because they were at a place where they couldn't do anything else but rehearse and be in contact with the others involved. So the closeness of the persons involved, and not only talking about the persons on stage, but also behind stage, they were so close, and they had no other topic, and they had not much things there. So there was and we know from some of those involved, especially Fritz Busch, he is said to have been a workaholic. He was working
had to be
all the day and sleeping not very much there. So there was a very dense period of rehearse and work regarding to that production.
And so different when you look at British opera production and performance at that period. Covent Garden, there was no resident company, there was no British National Opera Company, festivals or anything like that. We'll come on to Edinburgh in a moment. But somebody like Beecham, who sounds to me as though he was a little bit of a John Christie character. I know what I'm doing and nobody else does. But, why should we have foreign singers when I'm sure we've got perfectly good English ones, and we can put on, what's it called, that new one, Rosencavalier or something, with English singers who can learn the German. Well, I'll make sure they do. Whereas what Glyndebourne is doing is creating a resident, long-term, permanent company that recreates on an annual basis.
Yes.
For an annual audience that knows what they're doing.
We shouldn't oversee the flip side of that, because there's a lot of there have been a lot of accusation, especially against Christie, from that protectionist perspective. Why use international singers? They take the jobs of our national singers.
Exactly.
That's the flip side of the internationalization.
There was a resentment.
There was a strong resentment in that nationalist discourse, especially in a situation where many British artists had to fight with all those cliches of the land without music and the image of Deutsche Musik, and which also the immigrants brought from German-speaking Europe when they came to England, to their exile.
And many people admired German. So many of the great musicians would quote German. Schubert, Beethoven, Mozart,
and I mean
Wagner.
But hierarchies of the high culture of German-speaking
Goethe, Schiller.
It's very strong in that, and that also caused fears and attacks against Christie, and it's interesting. And when you come to the archive and see all the program books of Glyndebourne, you see every singer in the program is marked with his nationality.
Yes.
That's interesting, because that's how they showed, look how international we are. We have Canadians and Germans and
Finland, not just the German world.
And it was also a way to show how many British ones we have. And
Hedl Nash, people like
many. I mean, the whole opera chorus and the orchestra, most of them were British.
No, it's interesting. But again, look at the wider world, 1934, 5, 36, 37, 38, Anschluss, the sort of combination of Germany, Austria, the build-up of the Third Reich, and the possibility of a war, which might finally take over from everywhere. And when it did, in the opera house that was including German or Italian singers, simply couldn't continue. Covent Garden didn't, and in the case of Glyndebourne, they became a temporary evacuation center, I think, for homeless children. They had to do something like that. And I remember Rudolph Bing saying he had to go out and buy a whole lot of little potties for the children, which is what you do if you're housing a lot of kids. But there was also an attempt nationwide to spread the arts cheaply around the nation as a whole. And Glyndebourne, among others, tried to do all that. They had been at some point earlier on thinking of migrating to the United States, performing at the World Fair in America, maybe even moving bodily to the United States, but nothing like that came about. And I think, again, it's one of the themes that comes in the course of your book. migrating away, perhaps across the pond.
Yes, I think that's a really that was fascinating. I mean, that's the next chapter. If you see this spaceship that landed in at Glyndebourne, still was a spaceship. It still was.
Yes, might fly somewhere else.
To go somewhere else because the war came closer, and they were really seriously thinking about just bringing the whole thing to to New York when New York had the World's Fair in 1939, 1940, and the plan was quite concrete and it failed in the end. And it's interesting to see why it failed, because in fact there was encouraged a rich discussion about what is the Glyndebourne style, because Glyndebourne was no longer conceived as a place, but as a concept of opera production and a certain style of doing opera, which has to do with Mozart, but also with a certain relationship of opera and acting, not just singing, but acting, and make the narrative realistic, and also about intimacy. They said what we do cannot be done on a huge stage like the Metropolitan. We need a small stage, and we need an intimate situation between the singers and the audience. I mean, New York, as we know, has a lot of intimate theaters. Which city, if not New York? But they, in the short time, they didn't manage to rent a theater. A couple of years later, a company was founded in New York, and they produced the Glyndebourne idea with Fritz Busch, which, and without Ebert, who was very angry about that, because
Yes,
they used the whole concept and the whole intimate idea of producing, but in a way it did. So that was really interesting to observe that eventually failed project of moving on.
Before we sort of sum up, which I also want to do in a moment, let me just invite you to share with me the extraordinary impact of Glyndebourne and others touring around Britain. One of the many places that they went in 1940, after war had broken out and Glyndebourne had to be closed down, was Edinburgh, Scotland. And there's a lovely story how Rudolph Bing, who was running it at that time, he was wandering around Edinburgh one beautiful evening with Audrey Mildmay, and they had been, what the show they had been putting on in Edinburgh was the Beggar's Opera, popular Beggar's Opera, which goes back originally to 1720s or something, but it was revived between the wars by the baritone Frederick Austin, the Threepenny Opera of Brecht and Kurt Weill. So it was quite well known, quite popular, parody of opera in some ways, two sopranos saying, "I'm better than she is," and all the rest of it. And they put on the Beggar's Opera in Edinburgh. And while they were there, Rudolph Bing was wandering around one lovely evening after the show with Audrey Mildmay, who was playing in the show. And he looked up at Arthur's Seat, this wonderful sort of hill mountain on the edges of Edinburgh that you can look down from. And he said, "You know, it reminds me of, it's rather like the hills in Salzburg. But they don't have a festival here in Edinburgh. Don't you think they should, Audrey? What do you think?" And of course, she was a great encourager of everything, rightly. And it was Bing primarily, I think, who immediately after the war was over helped initiate an annual music festival, like in Salzburg, in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh International Festival, which was initiated in 19 1947 with Bruno Walter and the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. And it was a great success, and that was the first of what's been an annual Edinburgh Festival ever since. So that without Glyndebourne, there'd have been no Glyndebourne, and there'd be no Edinburgh Festival, and probably other things as well. What do you think? Am I getting that right, Nils? Or am I exaggerating it all?
Absolutely. I mean, Rudolph Bing, he was the central figure of the Edinburgh Festival, and I mean the narrative as well is that the Edinburgh Festival was kind of a copy of the Salzburg Festival, but that's wrong. It was a copy, or maybe a branch of the Glyndebourne Festival.
Of course it was, and still is in some ways.
And that's so interesting about. I think Peter Adey says the festivals are always look like something from somewhere else, but they don't. They look. I mean, they are, but they don't look like they pretend to be something regional, but in fact they are something on the move, and they are something that can happen somewhere else at the same time. And but they hide that character of being mobile, and that's the interesting thing about the Edinburgh Festival, which is not part of our book because we stopped at 1940.
Of course,
but really that's the next chapter of the whole story after the war is the reopening of Glyndebourne and Edinburgh.
Absolutely.
Maybe from the same spirit and from the same persons.
And the fully rounded performances that Glyndebourne became so famous for because of the emigrés who were working there, spread around Edinburgh and many, many other places to America and beyond. So we're not only talking about the creation of Glyndebourne, we're talking about the creation of the wider view, multi view of that complex production form, what we call opera. I think I need to sort of get you to sum up in a minute. How would you generalize about the book of which you are one of the principal editors, looking back now and looking forward, because I'm still waiting for the physical copy of the book.
Yes, me too.
It's a very creative, imaginative, very scholarly book with a lot of detail that can only arise from archive research, and we were very glad to see that a little talk about the archives. Probably not aimed at a mass general opera-loving audience, but is full of very, very interesting theory, concept, detail, names, locations. Wouldn't you say?
I mean, yes, thank you. You're absolutely right. But I also hope that this new theory and new reflection is also worthy to a broader audience, because it might help to rethink what opera is from the start, and how those concepts of what opera can be, how that developed, and to just maybe to find new ways about thinking about what music is in the concept of mobile or maybe national or fixed concepts of music production, because it shows very much the dynamics of thinking and producing music between spaces and in oscillations, and not only because of exile and refuge, but also in other mobilities, and also to show that's another important thought, I think, that we depart from explaining arts in exile just from the aspect of the threats and of damages, but also the creative chances that arise when people move.
Well, I mentioned earlier, I mean, there are two current themes, one of which I already mentioned, and that is migration and the controversies it keeps raising. But here is a classical example of the benefits that can accrue from mobility, your phrase, or migration. And the other is that we're living at a time when not only here, but in the States and elsewhere, funding for the arts, particularly rather expensive, complex arts, is being removed, taken away, not something that governments, plural, try to emphasize. And here is another classical example of the benefits if they actually do help encourage the arts in both the quality of what is produced and the range of people who appreciate them. So here, let's end not on a miserable note, but a happy one, which I find difficult these days, and an optimistic note about not only the arts and mobility, and this whole project we've been talking about. It fits completely into Monica's overall long-term project. It's about outsiders who, to the benefit of all of us, went on to become insiders, outsiders, which we all are in our different ways. So many thanks to Nils, and earlier to Norbert and his colleagues from the Clemson University Press and so on. And I would like to hand back to Monica, because I suspect the audience will have many questions, primarily for you, Nils, but not only. And I'm going to get out the way and have a good listen and a good learn. So thank you for all in participating for the time being. And back to you, Monica. Thank you for having me doing what I've done.
And thank you, Daniel, very much. It wouldn't be what it has been without you. And we had just so far, and I hope there will be some other questions coming in shortly, just very practical questions. Some of you may already have seen the chat. Will the book be available at Glyndebourne in the shop there? And Norbert has responded by saying, yes, I heard just today that Glyndebourne shop would like to stock the book. I should jolly well hope so, I have to say. But anyway, it may take a few weeks before it actually hits the shelves, but it will. And indeed, there is another very practical question. You've beaten me to it. I was actually about to chip in and say, yes, there is a discount. I've actually been given two different codes, but Alison, if you wouldn't mind just typing in the link to the Liverpool University Press, and I realise I got your affiliation wrong, forgive me, I thought you were in the UK, not in the States, but there's a 30% discount on the cover price. And I think I'm right, Alison, yes, that the correct code, when you go to the Liverpool University website, you will find it simply by typing in, actually, is she going to, yes, there we are. Lovely, not good, you've done it. Okay, so the code in question is 27conf, CONF 30. So there you are. Yes, do go for it. So does anybody have any questions more to do with the content and the themes being addressed this evening? Perhaps I can start the ball rolling with a question perhaps aimed at Nils and indeed Norbert, but also Phil Boot, who perhaps, Norbert, if I can bring you back into the limelight, as it were. And where's Phil? There we go. Yes. Now, I'll start on a very personal note, because actually, at the very, very beginning of the Insiders Outsiders project, I seem to remember I happened to be in Sussex for some other reason, and I obviously knew something of this extraordinary, not sufficiently known early history of Glyndebourne, and I took the opportunity to get myself to Glyndebourne and to meet your predecessor, Julia Aries, who took me into the archive, and we had a good chat. And she said to me then, and this picks up with something you, I think, said in your brief presentation tonight, that there was a huge number of letters in German that hadn't to date been published. Now, Norbert, you can probably answer this. I seem to remember discussing this with you some years ago, and I assume for the purposes of this book, much has been translated. You have scrutinized that archive, but has everything been translated? And then on the back of that is a bigger, perhaps even more important question. What do we know or not know about those who needed to flee from Nazi-dominated Europe in the music world, who may have appealed to John Christie for help, but didn't get it?
Well, I'll very briefly say about the German language material. I mean, obviously, that was one of the great strengths that we had, an international team, and also Beth Snyder, who did a lot of the archival work together with Nils, also had lived and studied and worked in Germany. So she was also quite fluent and she is very fluent in German. So I mean, and yes, there are some examples of, I mean, I know, for example, Bertolt Goldschmidt, the composer who appealed to Karl Ebert, with whom he had worked very closely in Berlin. And Ebert at some stage did say that there seemed to be too many Germans already working at Glyndebourne, and it was politically not so easy for him to bring in yet another refugee emigré musician, although Goldschmidt actually did work for Glyndebourne as a chorus master later on, and also conducted a little bit. But I'll let you add to this, Phil.
Yeah, so no, they haven't actually all been translated, but because we have this new project catalogue, a lot of the correspondence, they've all been flagged for translation. So they will be translated at some point, and they will be available online for people to look at some point. So it's coming in the future.
From archivist to archivist, may I just raise my voice? I'm the archivist of the Busch Brothers archives in Karlsruhe.
Sorry, may I know who's talking? I'm very happy to bring you on. What's your name?
Jürgen Scharwächter is noted
yes,
in
indeed.
my...
Hold on, I saw you.
And of course, there are many more letters that you don't have at Glyndebourne, at the Glyndebourne archives. And well, we have, in total for our entire archive, only some 18,000 letters. They have not all been transcribed because the Busch Brothers archive is just a very tiny part of the Max Reger Institute. And I'm the archivist of all of that stuff. Very solely. I found it very interesting to see how the stuff you have in Glyndebourne and ours, when it's joining, it's highly interesting to see. Frequently, we have the replies to your letters and the other way around.
Yes. So when Beth and Nils told me that, it was just incredible to hear that the reply from the letter in Glyndebourne, the reply is with you, and it's just so incredible. I mean, it's the power of archives, really. More archival research should be done, but yeah, no, it's incredible. And once we start having this online, you'll be able to start looking at those and what we have, and what we'll start matching yours up.
Yes, I can say that that has been fascinating part of that work, because I've been traveling to both archives, and I have to say thank you, Jürgen. We had that fantastic collaboration that also resulted in 2 chapters that you wrote for our book, but also for many of the chapters, we had the opportunity to use the rich archives from both, and which dovetail very much, and so the narrative gets closer also from the papers of Karl Ebert in Berlin, which is maybe the 3rd important archive for our project. And we also had the opportunity to include, and I have to say thank you to both of you, Jürgen and Phil. We had to include photos from both archives, which I think many of them have never been published or seen, but it's fantastic to have material, also photographic material from both archives in that book together. So thank you, both of you.
Thank you, Jürgen. An interesting question from Malcolm Noble. Did you get a sense of a distinctive Glyndebourne experience of being an emigré, or let's say a refugee, in contrast to other places in the UK or indeed the United States? Nils, I wonder if you would like to tackle that quite complex question.
Yeah. Yes, of course, many. I think the whole style of production was really distinctive. Well, that was something new. But there was one person in the cast who I'd like to mention. There was the German Jewish singer Irene Eisinger, and she was a fantastic Despina, we have some recordings. We have many recordings of the early productions, and I have never heard somebody else doing that role, especially in the recording studio that was not on stage, and always have the feeling you can see the action, you can follow a dialogue by a person who is singing. You understand each word and you understand each emotion, and that style of singing is extremely special. And before she left Germany, she was in opera buffa, but she also was in operetta. She had a very intense training in acting and singing, which is very rare in opera productions, especially what you can hear from German and Austrian recordings of the same time, i.e. of the Nazi era. There was the very strong emphasis on bel canto and strong voices that can fill huge theaters with 3,000 seats or so on. But to have that concept of a very intimate playing and singing, which they all worked very close together on, that was a result of a special collaboration of persons who you couldn't find so easy. And Irene Eisinger was maybe one of the core figures who could do that very special kind of singing and acting, and you can even hear it on the recordings. And today you can buy the recordings in very good, by the way, good digitized editions, and you can find some older editions very easy in the social media. So I just would like to encourage you to just hear those old recordings. They're really distinctive. Something.
Thank you. Norbert, would you like to tackle that bigger question about, is there anything comparable to Glyndebourne anywhere else?
Of course not.
Yes, I think it's not. It's really different to what happens in the huge opera festivals of that period when we're talking about the 1930s and the 1940s. That's really that's something different. Also in inside of internationality, but in fact that was very influential. And so many things in that period changed through Glyndebourne.
And of course in British opera practice as well, because the singers, of course, took away what they learned there. And I mean, this is the sense I got from talking to a lot of people who worked with Ebert and Busch. I mean, for example, Janet Baker, who was given so much confidence from that from those early breaks she had there, and she then really became an international star, and so did many others. So that is so I think it really was a very strong impulse for international opera. So I think the concept itself is almost more important than the place. That's what although the place is wonderful. I mean, everybody who hasn't been, do go. It's really worth it. And while I'm talking, I wanted to thank everyone from my point of view, because unfortunately I'm going to have to leave, but please carry on and the conversation, and I look forward to catching up with you sometime soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Norbert. Thanks for making time to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can come back to another question that I think we didn't answer yet, the question of if others approached Glyndebourne in order to flee Germany. They didn't make it. If somebody asked if there is some indication for that, and I can say yes, we have all those letters from persons, from singers especially, but also agencies. There is an agency. There was an agency, obviously run by Jews, who tried to help others to get out of Germany and Austria and Czechoslovakia by getting jobs at Glyndebourne. And they couldn't take so many, but there was a very touching conversation between between Rudolph Bing and the singer Vera Schwarz was a fantastic, must have been, I haven't heard her, but she must have been fantastic, Lady Macbeth in the Verdi production. But she tried to get another job, but they couldn't. They couldn't have her. So eventually she managed to flee to the United States. But Glyndebourne was not the bridge for her, and it's a very touching correspondence to read.
And from what you're saying, Phil, there may yet be more evidence of those who did not make it, you know, in the not yet translated archive. Interesting. Nils, do you have a sense of how fully Christie was himself aware of the real dangers of what was going on in Europe? Daniel, you're shaking your head.
I can't give a definite answer.
No.
But sorry, I can.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, is that your turn again?
Yeah.
The Christies weren't, well, they took notice of what was written in the newspapers, but they didn't much bother. They still intended to travel to Germany, to Nazi Germany, to attend the Munich Opera Festival, for example. And just when you mentioned Vera Schwarz, well, she didn't get another job because Fritz Busch didn't like her. Glyndebourne was not very much a place where only love was reigning. I'm very sorry. Particularly Fritz Busch was very strict in what he expected to have. He wanted to have perfect singers. He didn't bother if people were unable to sing proper Italian, because this was not usual at the time. At the same time, in Salzburg, Mozart da Ponte operas were still performed in German. And of course, in England, Mozart operas were frequently sung in English, particularly magic flute. And abduction from the Serail was absolutely horrid for anyone to cast, because nobody was able to find a proper Osmin, because nobody could sing that part, particularly not in German. I wanted to make one very small minor point yet. One very tragic figure in the Glyndebourne Festival, also mentioned well, fairly extensively in the book, is Oppenheim. He fell out of grace with Busch, and Busch took away from him any conducting opportunity he was able to take away from him. So there was envy. They were very much, Busch was frequently very touchy. And on the other hand, Ebert always wanted very good looking performers. There was no fat opera singer on stage for him. Certainly not. And this was something that was also important and was also new in these at this time.
Maybe that ties in with a question from Judith King, asking, when did the importance of acting start influencing opera productions elsewhere? I don't know if you'd like, Daniel, maybe you need to tackle that one.
Yes, I can.
Or Nils, go on.
Yes, I mean, that comes, in fact, we have that new concept of directing invented in early 20th century, especially by Max Reinhardt for the straight play. He wasn't an opera director, but the pupils of Max Reinhardt, to whom in a way Karl Ebert and others belonged, and they went to opera, and they took that new learnings from straight play directing to opera. And that was mostly in the 1920s, but that happened in Germany, nowhere else. And it's really a couple of small, sometimes some small theaters, like the Darmstadt theater was very innovative, and the Berlin Städtische Oper, the Staatsoper, on the other hand, they didn't have that concept. So there were some very specific persons who were doing that that process. And I just wanted to mention one anecdote that I think it was in 1939 when Audrey Malmö was invited to sing at the Salzburg Festival, and they had a huge argument, and you can see that in the letters, not to her, but about her, between Bing and Ebert, saying, I cannot accept that she's going to there and shake hands to murderers and suicidals. Which makes obvious that they didn't really understand what was going on politically in the world. That was your question, Monica.
No, it's yeah. I think it's important, isn't it, as a kind of antidote to the tendency to kind of rosy tint, you know, to look back at the past, this place as a place of sanctuary. It's not that simple, is it, indeed? And on that note, I think we should probably begin drawing to a close. But Dartington, of course, somebody mentioned Dartington. Sorry, I don't remember who, but there are some interesting points of contact and interchange there. And I'd just like to mention, if I may, that I organised an online conference, actually a 2-day conference, looking at Dartington precisely as a place of sanctuary across all the art forms, as some of you will already know. And there is actually a recording of it on the Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel for those people who would like to pursue it further, as indeed this recording will be posted fairly soon. Give us a few days, and you can then tell anybody else you feel might be interested in listening to the recording. I should also mention that I've worked with Norbert on a number of occasions. I'm sorry he had to leave us a little earlier, but there's a subsection on the YouTube channel on the internment episode, the so-called, you know, the enemy alien episode in 1940, and murky episode in British wartime history, as many of you will know. But actually the emphasis has been very much in keeping with the whole Insiders Outsiders project on the creativity in the internment camps. And indeed, I certainly remember one, and there may be more than one, sessions, one of them certainly with Norbert participating, on music in the internment camp. So again, you might like to check that out in the future. What else? Yes, perhaps to say that if anybody is intrigued to know more about the Insiders Outsiders project, we're going to take a short break now over the high summer, but back in the autumn with an array of interesting and diverse topics, but all related to this broader theme. You can sign up for our newsletter if you just go to the insidersoutsiders.festival.org website, scroll right down to the bottom right. It takes all of 2 minutes to sign up to our slightly sporadic, but I hope interesting and stimulating newsletter. So good. I think, yes, lots of nice comments coming in, but no more questions. The night is drawing on. It's awfully hot. I think we better call it a day. So thank you, everyone, but particularly Nils, but all the others as well, and indeed Daniel, to the publishers as well, indeed to Phil, for being so willing to take part. And hope to see you again at perhaps some other events. But in the meantime, keep well, keep drinking water, and all the very best. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Pleasure.